My name is Taylor Hopkins. I'm 37 years old, and for the past 2 years, I've been living a quiet, almost boring life in Denver, Colorado. On paper, everything looks fine. I'm a construction engineer at a mid-sized firm. I make enough to support my little family, and every weekday morning, I drive my 11-year-old son, Tyler, to school along the same tree-lined streets. We come home in the evenings, cook simple dinners, argue over homework, and fall asleep to the sound of the city humming in the background. Sometimes my boyfriend Ethan joins us. He brings dessert, tells Tyler corny dad jokes that aren't really his place, at least not yet, and pretends not to notice when I flinch at certain words like family or grandparents. From the outside, you'd think my life is almost normal. But there's a graveyard inside my head that no one can see. In that graveyard are 3 people who are still very much alive: my mother, my father, and my older brother, Matthew. To Tyler, I tell a different story. When he asks about them, and he still does every few weeks, I answer calmly, "They're gone, honey. They passed away. Just remember the good parts and move on." Sometimes he goes quiet, then looks up at me with those big brown eyes and says, "Mom, can we visit their grave someday?" Every time he says that, it feels like someone reaches into my chest and twists. Because the truth is, they're not buried in the ground. They're buried in my heart. They died there on a Wednesday in mid-July 2023. And this is the story of how, back then I wasn't living in Denver. I was in Chicago, raising Tyler on my own after my divorce in 2022. My ex-husband had moved to California with his new life and new priorities. He called Tyler on birthdays and holidays, if he remembered. The rest of the year, it was just me and my son. So when my company offered me a week-long business trip to Michigan, it felt huge. It was a critical project, the kind of assignment that could mean a promotion, a raise, a better life for Tyler. But it also meant one terrifying thing. I had to leave my 9-year-old son in someone else's hands. At first, I looked into hiring a babysitter. The idea of leaving him with a stranger for a whole week made my skin crawl. Tyler isn't the kind of kid you can just park in front of a TV and forget about. He's intense, curious, reckless in that way 9-year-old boys often are. I needed someone who loved him. So I did the thing many single parents do when they're out of options. I turned to my parents. When I called them, I could hear the reluctance in my mother's voice. "A whole week?" she complained. "Taylor, we're not young anymore. I can't be chasing some hyper little boy around the house. My back is already killing me." My dad chimed in with the familiar sigh. "And if something happens, that's a lot of responsibility on us." They pushed back, the way they always had when it came to doing anything that wasn't centered around my brother Matthew and his son Dylan. For a moment, I almost backed down, almost told my boss I couldn't go. Then I did something I'm not proud of. I offered money. "Look," I said quietly, "I'll send you an extra $1,000 for the week, for groceries, for your time. Take Tyler out to places, make it fun for him." There was a pause, the kind I knew too well. Within minutes, their tone changed. "Oh, honey, you should have said something like that from the beginning," my mom cooed. "Of course we'll take care of our grandson. It'll be good for him to spend time with us." "We'll keep him safe," my dad added. "Don't worry." I wanted to believe them. I needed to. So I did. The first 2 days of the business trip went smoothly. Every evening, I called Tyler. He told me about rummaging through my old childhood toys in the attic, watching movies with his grandparents, riding his bike in the yard. He sounded relaxed, happy even. On the morning of the 3rd day, I called around 8 o'clock a.m. just to hear his voice before heading to the construction site. He was excited. "Grandma says I can ride my bike today," he told me. "I'll be careful, I promise." I smiled, imagining him in the yard. Messy hair, skinny arms, too big helmet. "Okay, just don't do any stunts," I joked. "I love you." "I love you too, Mom." I didn't know those would be the last words I'd hear from him before everything fell apart. At 11:03 a.m., I was standing on the Michigan site, hard hat on, blueprints in hand, explaining load-bearing walls to a junior engineer. The sun was brutal, reflecting off steel beams and making everything feel a little unreal. That's when my phone vibrated in my pocket. Unknown number. For a second, I considered ignoring it. We get spam calls all the time, but something in my gut twisted. I stepped away from the noise and answered. "Hello?" A professional, calm female voice came through the line. "Hello, is this Ms. Taylor Hopkins?" "Yes, this is Taylor." "My name is Jennifer. I'm a nurse at St. Mary's Hospital in Chicago. We're trying to reach the parent or legal guardian of a patient named Tyler Hopkins." The world narrowed to a pinpoint. My fingers went cold. Yes, I whispered. He's my son. What happened? Is he okay? There was a pause, paper rustling. Then, Ms. Hopkins, your son has just come out of emergency surgery. He suffered a head injury this morning. The procedure to relieve pressure on his brain was successful, and he's stable for now. However, she hesitated. That hesitation scared me more than anything. However, there are currently no family members with him. We need a relative here as soon as possible. My brain refused to process the words. Surgery? I repeated stupidly. No, that has to be a mistake. Tyler is with his grandparents at their house. They live 10 minutes from your hospital. I understand you're confused, Nurse Jennifer said softly. She double-checked the chart. Tyler Hopkins, 9 years old, address in Chicago, emergency contact, Taylor Hopkins. The social security number on file is... She read the numbers. My knees almost gave out. That's my son, I choked out. That's my son. What happened to him? Why did he need brain surgery? Where are my parents? We don't have that information, Ms. Hopkins, she replied. Your parents brought him in around 10 o'clock a.m., signed initial paperwork, and then left. We tried calling them, but the calls went to voicemail. We had to contact you as the emergency number. Something inside me cracked. They left. My parents brought my bleeding, injured child to the hospital, and then left. I'm driving back now, I said, voice shaking. I'm in Michigan. It's a few hours away, but I'm leaving immediately. Please, please, just take care of my son. Don't let him be alone. We're watching him closely, she assured me. Drive safely. I hung up and just stood there, frozen, on a half-finished slab of concrete, while my coworkers kept moving around me, oblivious, carrying out their tasks. Their world hadn't shifted on its axis. Mine had. Taylor, you okay? The junior engineer asked. I have to go, I said. My son had surgery. I have to go. I don't remember the conversation with my boss clearly. Just fragments. Family emergency. My son. I'm sorry. I'm leaving now. He told me to go. I dropped my hard hat onto the nearest crate, grabbed my keys, and ran. The drive from Michigan back to Chicago felt both endless and terrifyingly short. I drove as fast as I dared, the highway a blur. My hands clenched the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My heart pounded in my throat. Every few minutes, I called my parents. First call, no answer. Second, voicemail. Third, fourth, fifth, straight to that same recorded message. Hi, you've reached the Hopkins residence. Leave a message after the beep. I left message after message, my voice growing more frantic each time. Mom, Dad, it's Taylor. What happened to Tyler? Where are you? Why did the hospital say you left? Call me back, please. Somewhere between the state line and the outskirts of Chicago, the fear began to morph into something hotter, uglier, rage. Because I knew my parents. I knew the way they prioritized things. I knew how Matthew and Dylan always came first. And yet, even knowing all that, I still hadn't imagined this. By the time I finally rushed into St. Mary's, my legs felt like jelly. My throat was raw from breathing too fast, too hard. At the reception desk, I slammed my ID on the counter. My son, Tyler Hopkins, brain surgery, where is he? The nurse checked the system, then pointed me to the third floor. I all but sprinted to his room. When I walked in, the sight of him nearly broke me. Tyler lay on the bed, so small he barely seemed to make a dent in the mattress. His head was wrapped in white bandages, a thin tube snaking out from under them. The steady beep of the monitor was the only sound in the room. For a moment, I couldn't move. I just stood there, taking in the rise and fall of his chest, counting each breath like it might be the last. Then I went to his side and took his hand. It was warm. Hey, baby, I whispered, tears burning in my eyes. Mom's here. I'm so sorry I wasn't here sooner. I'm here now, I promise. He didn't respond. The anesthesia still had him under, but I held his hand anyway, as if I could anchor him to this world through sheer force of will. 10 minutes later, a knock sounded at the door. 2 police officers, one male, one female, stepped inside, followed by a woman in a navy blazer holding a folder and wearing a badge that read Child Protective Services. Ms. Hopkins? The female officer asked gently. I nodded, my hand still wrapped around Tyler's. I'm Officer Ramirez. This is Officer Collins. This is Mrs. Williams from CPS. We're going to need to ask you some questions about what happened today. I swallowed hard. What happened is my parents abandoned my son during brain surgery, I said, my voice shaking. That's what happened. Mrs. Williams's expression was professional but sad. We need to understand the full situation, she said. Could we speak with you in the hallway for a few minutes? I didn't want to leave Tyler's side, but I forced myself to let go of his hand. Out in the corridor, under the humming fluorescent lights, I told them everything. I explained that I was a single mother since my divorce in 2022, that my ex-husband had virtually disappeared from Tyler's life, that I'd been offered a crucial project in Michigan and, against my instincts, had left Tyler with my parents because I trusted them more than a stranger. I told them how my parents had hesitated until I mentioned the $1,000, how their tone had changed instantly, how the first 2 days had seemed fine. Officer Collins took notes while Mrs. Williams asked precise, careful questions. How often my parents saw Tyler, whether there had been previous incidents, whether they treated him differently from Dylan. I hesitated before answering that last one. Yes, I finally said. They've always treated Matthew and his son like royalty. Tyler, not so much. But I never imagined they'd do something like this. The officers exchanged a look. We attempted to reach your parents after the hospital flagged the situation, Officer Ramirez said. Multiple calls, no answer. All went to voicemail. I laughed then, a short, bitter sound. That sounds like them, I said, running when things get hard. As if on cue, my phone buzzed in my pocket. For a second, hope flared. Maybe that's them, I muttered, pulling it out, praying it was a call or a text explaining everything. Maybe they'd lost their phones. Maybe their car had broken down. Maybe. It wasn't a call. It was a notification. Instagram Matthew. Hopkins added to his story for the first time in a while. My stomach dropped. My thumb hovered over the screen. Ms. Hopkins? Mrs. Williams asked. Is it them? I don't know. Give me a second. I tapped the notification. The app opened. And there, filling my screen, was a perfectly framed photo of a backyard decked out in balloons and banners. A banner that read, Happy 10th birthday, Dylan! My parents stood on either side of my brother Matthew, all three of them grinning, like this was the happiest day of their lives. In front of them, Dylan leaned over a dinosaur-shaped cake, cheeks puffed, ready to blow out the candles. In the next video clip, my dad was laughing, helping Dylan open gifts. My mom clapped, surrounded by guests. Music blared in the background. People cheered. Everyone seemed carefree, joyful, while my 9-year-old son lay in a hospital bed with his head cut open. The world tilted. I felt the blood drain from my face, my hand gripping the phone so hard my knuckles ached. Ms. Hopkins? Officer Ramirez asked, noticing my expression change. What is it? What do you see? I slowly turned the phone so they could see the screen. I know where my parents are, I said, my voice hollow. They're at a birthday party. The silence that followed my words was heavy. Officer Ramirez studied the Instagram story on my phone, then exchanged a look with Mrs. Williams and Officer Collins. You're saying, she clarified, while your son was undergoing emergency brain surgery, your parents and brother were at a birthday party? I swallowed hard. My throat felt tight. Yes, I whispered. That's exactly what I'm saying. On the screen, my mother's face was frozen mid-laugh, holding a glass of punch. My father was bending down to hug Dylan. Colorful balloons, a crowd of people, a table overflowing with food. My son somewhere above us in this building, alone. Mrs. Williams' jaw tightened. We'll need the address of this party, she said calmly, but I could hear the steel underneath. I zoomed in on a clip that showed the backyard more clearly. A familiar wooden fence, a tree I'd climbed as a teenager. I didn't need an address. I knew every inch of that house. It's my brother's place in Lincoln Park, I said, voice shaking. I can take you there. The officers nodded. We'll need to speak with them in person, Officer Collins said, about why they left the hospital and didn't respond to any calls. I stared at the screen for a moment longer, then turned it off. My hand shook as I slipped the phone into my pocket. Before we left, I stepped back into Tyler's room. The machines hummed softly. He lay there, so still, the bandages stark against his small face. I leaned over and kissed his forehead, careful not to touch the dressings. I'll be right back, baby, I whispered. I'm just going to make sure the people who are supposed to love you understand what they've done. I didn't know then that I was walking out of my old life and into a war. The drive to Lincoln Park took about 20 minutes, but it felt both too long and not nearly long enough. I sat in the back of the patrol car while the world outside blurred into neighborhoods I knew too well. Every street was filled with memories. That's where Matthew and I used to bike as kids. That's the coffee shop where my mom always bragged about Dylan's grades. That's the park where Tyler begged for just 5 more minutes on the swings. I stared straight ahead, numb, feeling the anger slowly condense into something cold and sharp. When the police cars turned onto my brother's street and rolled to a stop in front of his house, the first thing I heard was laughter. loud, carefree, echoing over the tall wooden fence. It made my skin crawl. Matthew's house looked like it always did during events, cars lining the curb, decorations spilling out into the yard, music thumping in the background. The kind of picture-perfect suburban happiness people post on social media with hashtags like #blessed and #family first. The irony almost made me dizzy. As the engines cut off, the music seemed to grow louder for a moment. Slowly, faces began appearing near the fence and windows, curious eyes tracking the sudden arrival of 2 police cruisers and a CPS vehicle. The laughter started to die. Officer Ramirez turned to me before getting out. "Ms. Hopkins, we'll be with you, but this is still an active investigation. When we go in, try to keep things verbal. No physical confrontations. Understood?" I nodded, my jaw clenched. "I just want them to hear the truth," I said. "All of it." We stepped out of the car. As we walked through the front gate into the backyard, the party fell into an uncanny silence, like someone had hit mute on reality. About 50 guests stood frozen with paper plates and plastic cups in their hands, staring at us. Children clung to their parents' legs. Some people exchanged nervous glances. And there they were. My parents stood near the buffet table, my mother holding a drink, my father mid-conversation with a neighbor. Matthew was by the cake, one arm wrapped around Dylan's shoulders. The moment they saw me, all 3 of them went pale, as if the color had been drained from their skin. They knew. They knew exactly where they were supposed to be, and they knew why I was here. I walked straight into the middle of the yard, the grass soft under my shoes, eyes never leaving them. My voice came out louder than I expected. "You're all bastards!" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone dropped a fork. My mother's drink slipped from her hand and shattered against the patio stones, red punch splattering across her shoes. "Taylor!" she hissed, mortified. "What on earth are you doing?" My dad stiffened, his jaw tightening. "This is Dylan's birthday," he snapped. "You're making a scene." "Oh," I replied, a strange calm washing over me. Am I making a scene? That's funny, because right now my 9-year-old is lying in a hospital bed with his head cut open. And nobody was there with him. Not his grandparents, not his uncle, no one. The yard went utterly silent. I could feel dozens of eyes turning slowly from me to my parents, to Matthew, to Dylan's bright dinosaur cake and untouched presents. My mother tried to recover, forcing a shaky smile. "Taylor, this isn't the time or place." "Oh, I think it's exactly the time," I cut in, grabbing the microphone from the portable speaker setup near the DJ table. My hands shook, but my voice grew steadier with every word. "And this is definitely the place." I flicked on the mic. The soft crackle of sound filled the yard. "If we're going to talk about family," I said, "let's talk about what family actually means." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of every guest's gaze on me. Somewhere behind me, I sensed the officers standing watch, ready to step in if things escalated. I raised the mic. "My name is Taylor Hopkins," I began. "I'm Tyler's mother. Some of you know me. Most of you at least know that my parents were supposed to be watching my son this week while I was on a work trip." Several people nodded. One of my father's golfing friends shifted uneasily. "This morning," I continued, "while I was in Michigan, I got a call from St. Mary's Hospital. Tyler had fallen off his bike, hit his head on a rock, and needed emergency brain surgery. The nurse told me he was stable, but there was one problem." I paused, letting the words hang. There were no family members with him. They brought him in, and then they left. They left a 9-year-old child alone in a hospital, in a life-threatening situation, because... I swept my hand out, taking in the decorations, the food, the perfectly arranged cake. Because this was more important. Murmurs surged through the crowd like a wave. A woman around 50, who I vaguely recognized as one of Matthew's coworkers, spoke up shakily. "Is that true?" she asked, turning to my parents. "You left a child alone during surgery?" My dad's face flushed red. "Taylor, that's enough," he barked. "You're twisting things. We brought him to the hospital. The doctors were taking care of him. We came here for a few hours and we're going back after..." "A few hours?" I repeated incredulously. "You couldn't put off a birthday party long enough to make sure your grandson made it through brain surgery?" My mother stepped forward, eyes blazing with a mix of guilt and anger. "This is Dylan's 10th birthday," she snapped. "We've been planning this for weeks. What did you expect us to do? Cancel everything? Disappoint him? Traumatize all these children?" Behind her, Dylan had begun to cry, fat tears rolling down his cheeks as he clutched at Matthew's shirt. My heart twisted. He didn't deserve this. But neither did Tyler. Trauma, I said quietly into the mic. You're talking about traumatizing party guests while my child woke up from surgery with nobody there to hold his hand? The murmurs grew louder, sharper now. One man near the grill muttered, "That's messed up," under his breath. Another woman shook her head, disgusted. A neighbor I knew as Mrs. Conway raised her voice. "Are you people crazy? You don't leave a 9-year-old alone in a hospital like that. What were you thinking?" "I've known you for 20 years, another guest said to my father, "and I've never been this disappointed in you." My Uncle Robert stepped forward from the back of the crowd, his face stormy. "Big brother," he said, pointing at my dad, "Tyler is a child, your grandson. How could you walk away from him like that?" I watched as the party began to unravel in real time. Some guests put down their plates and quietly gathered their children. A couple shook their heads, murmuring, "We're leaving. This is insane." Others stood frozen, eyes darting between me and my parents, trying to process the gap between the kind, respected people they thought they knew and the ones who left a child alone in surgery. Within minutes, people started filing out through the side gate. Even some of Matthew's closest friends refused to look him in the eye as they left. Dylan's sobs grew louder. He stared at the half-lit candles on his cake and then at the disappearing guests, utterly confused. And that's when the guilt hit me like a punch to the stomach. I had just detonated his birthday in front of him. I closed my eyes for a heartbeat, gripping the mic. "I'm sorry, kid," I thought. "You're innocent. You didn't do anything wrong." But then I pictured Tyler in that stark white room, machines beeping beside him, tiny hand lying empty on the hospital bed. Between my nephew's birthday party and my son's life, I knew which one I'd destroy again if I had to. While the chaos swirled, the police finally stepped forward. "Mr. and Mrs. Hopkins," Officer Ramirez said firmly, "we need to speak with you about what happened this morning. Now." The remaining guests fell silent again, hanging on every word. My father straightened, attempting to regain some authority. "This is a family matter," he said stiffly. "We can handle it privately." Officer Collins shook his head. "You left a minor alone during a medical emergency. That's not just a family matter. That's a legal one." The officers led my parents and Matthew to a quieter corner of the yard, near the sliding glass doors. I followed, arms crossed, heart pounding. "What time did the accident happen?" Officer Ramirez asked. "Around 9, my father replied, avoiding my eyes. "He was riding his bike in the backyard. We told him to be careful." "We always tell him," my mother added quickly. "Kids are just active." "And was he wearing a helmet?" the officer asked. A pause. "No," my father admitted. We were just in the yard. We didn't think—" He trailed off. They described the accident. Tyler pedaling along the path near the porch, the sudden swerve, the crash, the sound of his head hitting the decorative rock, my mother's scream, the blood. For a brief second, I saw the terror in my mother's eyes as she relived it. I believed them about the accident. I believed they were scared in that moment. What I couldn't forgive was what happened next. "What did you do after the ambulance took him to the hospital?" Officer Collins asked. "We followed them," my mom said quickly. "We filled out the paperwork, told the doctors about his allergy to penicillin. We waited until they said he needed surgery." "And then?" the officer pressed. My father's shoulders slumped. "And then we left," he muttered. "Why?" Officer Ramirez asked, her voice cutting cleanly through the air. My mother's chin trembled. "It was Dylan's birthday," she said, as if that explained everything. "We have guests. We've been planning this for months. We thought the doctors would handle everything and call us if something went wrong. We thought he'd be fine." Officer Ramirez stared at them for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "You left a 9-year-old alone in brain surgery," she said quietly, "to go to a birthday party." No one spoke. In the distance, the dinosaur cake sat untouched and ridiculous, candles now dimmed and curling over themselves. "Do you have security cameras in the backyard?" Officer Collins asked suddenly. My father hesitated. Yes, he said, covering the yard and the porch. "We'll need to see the footage," the officer said. "Now." Reluctantly, my dad pulled out his phone and opened the camera app. Within minutes, they were reviewing the footage. Tyler riding his bike, the sudden wobble, the crash, the fall, my mother rushing toward him. The accident, at least, was exactly what they'd described. "Thank you," Officer Ramirez said, her voice professional once more. "We'll need to retain a copy of this for our report." They transferred the footage and tucked it away with their notes. The accident itself, I realized, wasn't the damning part. Their choice afterward was. As the officers stepped aside to make a few calls, I looked around the yard. The balloons drooped, the music was off, guests were gone. All that remained was a ruined party, a crying 10-year-old boy inside the house, and 3 adults who were about to learn what it meant to finally be held accountable. And I knew, standing there in the wreckage of their perfect image, that this was only the beginning of the war I was about to wage against my own blood. The police officers stepped away to speak privately, leaving me standing in the middle of the yard with the 3 people who raised me, people I no longer recognized. My mother was trembling and dabbed uselessly at the punch stain on her dress. My father paced in a small, frustrated circle as if trying to walk off guilt like it was a leg cramp. Matthew stood stiff and pale near the patio doors, Dylan's cries echoing faintly from the house behind him. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Matthew broke. He stormed toward me, voice sharp with panic and rage. "This is your fault," he snapped. "You ruined my son's birthday." I stared at him in disbelief. "My fault?" I repeated quietly. "Tyler was in brain surgery, Matthew." "You could have said something privately," he spat. "You didn't have to humiliate us." "Humiliate you?" My voice rose. "You left a 9-year-old alone in an operating room so you could cut cake and take Instagram photos. I didn't humiliate you. You did." My father stepped in, shaking his head bitterly. "That stunt with the microphone. You didn't need to expose us like that. We could have handled this as a family." "As a family?" I repeated. The words tasted like poison. The yard was still littered with party remnants, half-eaten sandwiches, trampled balloons, a plastic dinosaur laying on its side as if knocked over during the exodus. My mother, still trembling, spoke next. "You embarrassed us, Taylor," she said, voice cracking. "You made everyone think we're terrible people." "You abandoned my son," I replied coldly. "You are terrible people." She flinched. My father opened his mouth, then closed it again, his face twisting into something between anger and regret. Dylan's sobs echoed again, fainter this time, as if Emily had finally managed to guide him deeper into the house. His cries tugged at something inside me, a piece of my heart that still cared for the innocent child caught in the crossfire. I took a slow breath, forcing myself to center. "Emily," I called gently toward the doorway. "Please take Dylan to his room." Emily looked startled, but nodded quickly. She tugged Dylan away, whispering soothingly. He cried harder when he spotted the ruined cake. Once the boy was out of sight, I turned back to the 3 adults in front of me. "This conversation," I said, "isn't for children." My father stepped closer. "Taylor, please, let's not escalate this. We love Tyler. We just didn't think—" "That's the problem," I cut in sharply. "You didn't think. You never think when it comes to Tyler. But for Matthew and Dylan, you plan, you prioritize, you sacrifice. Always." My mother stiffened. "That's not fair." "No?" I asked. "Really, because right now, my son is lying in a hospital with his head bandaged. And where were you? Feeding cake to Dylan." Matthew scoffed. "Dylan is important to this family." I stared at him, stunned. "And Tyler isn't?" Matthew didn't answer. He didn't need to. Silence settled over us like heavy dust. Something inside me hardened, final, irreversible. I straightened my shoulders. "Congratulations," I said softly. "From now on, you only have 1 child, Matthew, and 1 grandchild, Dylan." My mother's face went slack with shock. What are you saying?" "I'm done," I said. "I'm cutting all ties with this family, completely." My father blinked rapidly. "You don't mean that." "I do." My mother reached for my hand, but I stepped back. "No, you don't get to touch me. Not after today." My father's voice rose, desperate now. "Taylor, you're angry." "I'm furious," I corrected. "And I'm clear. I want no contact, ever again." Their stunned silence felt like ash. Then Matthew snapped back into fight mode. "You can't just walk away from family. Watch me." But I wasn't done. I turned to my father first. "I want the Camry keys. Now." His eyes widened. "We're using that car. How are we supposed to get around?" "That's not my problem. It's my car. I lent it to you after I bought my new one. I want it back." My mother gasped. "You'd take your parents' only car? At a time like this?" "You abandoned my child," I said calmly. "Give me the keys." Matthew stepped forward. "This is disgusting, Taylor. Asking for money now? Really?" "Not asking," I replied coolly. "Demanding. You owe me $5,000. I want it back." Matthew's nostrils flared. "You're insane." "And you," I added, turning to my parents, "owe me $12,000. 30 days to repay, or I'll involve a lawyer. No exceptions." My mother's voice shrilled. "You're heartless." "No," I said. "I'm done being used." My father clenched his jaw. "We need that car. You're not taking it." "2 options," I said. "Hand me the keys, or I'll call a tow truck and report the car as stolen. Your choice." The standoff stretched painfully long. Finally, my father reached into his pocket, pulled out the key ring, and flung it at the ground in front of me. Take it, he snapped, if that makes you happy. I bent, picked up the keys, and straightened. No, I said softly, it doesn't make me happy at all. Not one of them could meet my eyes. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the yard. No one called after me. Just silence, heavy, suffocating, final. The kind of silence that follows a funeral. An hour later, I stood in the hospital hallway again. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I approached Tyler's room. Outside the door, I was startled to see Aunt Linda, Uncle Robert, and his wife Sarah sitting on the plastic chairs, eyes red with worry. When they saw me, Aunt Linda rushed to her feet and pulled me into a tight hug. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, "I'm so sorry. Tyler will be okay. He's strong." Uncle Robert put a steady hand on my shoulder. "What your parents did," he said, jaw tight, "is unforgivable. You did the right thing." Sarah offered me a soft smile. "You handled it better than anyone could have, Taylor. Tyler is lucky to have you." For the first time that day, warmth broke through the coldness in my chest. Not all family was broken. Some still had hearts. They stayed with me a while longer before leaving to give Tyler rest. Inside the quiet room, I sat beside my son and took his hand again. Machines hummed gently in the background. I studied his face, the faint freckles, the long eyelashes, the bandages. Under the harsh light, he looked so small it hurt. Guilt crashed over me again. I whispered, "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry I wasn't here when you needed me." I blamed myself for trusting the wrong people, for choosing work, for believing my parents were capable of love. But sitting there, holding Tyler's hand, I made a silent promise. Never again would I let anyone else be responsible for him. Never again would I put him in harm's way because I wanted to believe family meant something. Hours passed. At around 11 p.m., Tyler stirred. His eyelids fluttered open, groggy from the anesthesia. "Mom," he whispered. I leaned in, brushing his hair gently. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here." "My head hurts," he murmured. "I know," I whispered, "but you're safe now." He looked around the room, confused. "Where's Grandma? Grandpa? Uncle Matthew?" My heart clenched. I couldn't tell him the truth. Not now. Not while he was lying in a hospital bed with stitches and IV tubes. So I said the first lie I would tell many times afterward. "They had something they had to do," I whispered. "It's just Mom tonight." He accepted it with a sleepy nod. "Okay." Within minutes, he drifted back to sleep, and I sat there, watching him breathe, knowing this was the moment everything in our lives had changed forever. The next morning at the hospital was strangely quiet. Nurses moved softly through the hallway, and the sunlight that filtered through the blinds felt gentler somehow, as if the world itself understood that Tyler needed rest. I'd only slept for maybe 20 minutes in a chair by his bed. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes. My parents laughing at the party, the empty chair beside Tyler's operating table, Dylan crying as the birthday guests fled. At around 10 a.m., a soft knock came at the door. I expected Nurse Jennifer. Instead, when I opened it, my parents, Matthew and Emily, stood crowded in the hallway. I instinctively stepped outside and closed the door behind me so they wouldn't disturb Tyler. My mother's eyes were red and puffy. My father's face was tight with forced remorse. Matthew looked angry. Angry at me, not at himself. Emily stood behind him, arms wrapped around her torso. The hallway felt suddenly too small. My mother spoke first, voice trembling. "Taylor, please let us see Tyler, just for a minute. We're so worried." I stared at them, feeling absolutely nothing. "No," I said. My father blinked. "Taylor?" I cut him off. "You're not seeing him. You're not going near him. You left him alone during brain surgery. You forfeited your right to be in his life." Matthew stepped forward defensively. "Okay, yes, mistakes were made, but we came to apologize. Can't we be adults about this?" Adults. The word nearly made me laugh. But instead, I spoke plainly. "You could face 1 to 5 years in prison for child abandonment," I said. "I'm pressing charges. I'm going all the way." My mother gasped. "Prison? Taylor, we're your parents." "That didn't matter to you yesterday," I replied calmly, "when you chose a birthday party over your grandson." My father exhaled, trying to steady himself. "Taylor, we were going to come back right after the party. You are blowing this way out of proportion." Emily's eyes darted nervously, but she stayed quiet. Matthew raised both hands in a pleading gesture. "Look, Tyler needs a united family right now. You're hurting him more by doing this." I stared at him. Then I looked each of them in the eye, slowly, deliberately. "No," I said, "you hurt him." Before they could respond, I gestured to a nearby nurse. "Can you call security? I'd like these people escorted out." My parents looked stunned. Security arrived within minutes. My mother begged. My father tried to reason. Matthew shouted that I was psychotic. But none of it mattered. Security escorted them out of the hospital, and I requested a formal ban. No visitation, no updates, no contact. They were done, and so was I. 2 months later, the final trial took place at the Cook County Courthouse. Every detail of that day is burned into my memory. The courtroom smelled faintly of old books and floor polish. Tyler sat beside me in the gallery, healthy, recovered, wearing a small blue hoodie. He doodled quietly while I squeezed his shoulder every few minutes just to reassure myself he was really okay. My parents sat on the opposite side of the room with their attorney. They looked smaller than I'd ever seen them. My mother clutched tissues in both hands. My father stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. Matthew sat behind them, glaring at me like I had personally destroyed his life. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. The prosecutor stood and began recounting the case in painstaking detail. The accident, the emergency surgery, the lack of family presence, the hospital's repeated attempts to reach them, the Instagram post time-stamped during Tyler's operation, the video evidence of the accident, statements from hospital staff confirming no guardian was present during critical decisions. My parents' lawyer tried desperately to minimize everything, arguing that they followed the ambulance. They provided necessary medical information. The accident was genuine. They intended to return later. They were overwhelmed and made a poor judgment call. But the judge wasn't swayed. I still remember the exact words. This court finds that the defendants abandoned a minor during a life-threatening medical emergency. Their actions exhibited severe negligence and disregard for the child's well-being. My mother burst into tears. My father's shoulders sagged. The judge continued. Both defendants are sentenced to 3 years of suspended prison time. They will be placed under strict supervision. They are prohibited from contacting Tyler Hopkins until he reaches age 18. Additionally, they are required to repay the financial debt owed to Ms. Taylor Hopkins within 60 days, with legal interest. The gavel struck. It was over. I didn't cry. Not then. Relatives approached me afterward. Aunt Linda, Uncle Robert, cousins I hadn't seen since childhood. They all said variations of the same thing. You did the right thing. They went too far. I can't believe they would choose a party over Tyler. We're proud of your strength. And yet, as I watched my parents being ushered out of the courtroom by officers, heads down, shoulders trembling, I felt something hollow open inside me. Not regret, not sympathy, just the grief of finally accepting that the family I was born into never really existed the way I had hoped. 1 month later, I made the decision that would change everything. I moved Tyler and myself out of Chicago. I didn't ask him. I simply told him gently, "We're starting fresh, sweetheart. Somewhere safer, somewhere better." I sold my house, sold everything that reminded me of my parents, liquidated whatever wasn't essential, changed my phone number, changed my email, cut off every relative except Linda and Robert, blocked everyone else. By the end of 3 weeks, all ties were severed. I'd chosen Denver, Colorado, far enough to feel like another planet. I found a job at a reputable construction firm that offered excellent pay and room for advancement. Tyler started at a new school, made new friends, and slowly, miraculously, began healing from it all. As for me, I healed more slowly, but I healed. 2 years later, life had settled into something resembling peace. Tyler grew taller, stronger, and happier. I earned promotions at work. Our neighbors became our support system. And yes, Ethan, the man who would eventually become my boyfriend, entered our lives during this period. Kind, grounded, patient. A man who moved gently around my wounds until I let him in. I built something here. Something real. Something safe. Something I never thought I'd have again. But one thing still haunted me. One truth I hadn't figured out how to face. No matter how settled our life became, no matter how far we ran, Tyler still occasionally asked, "Mom, can we visit Grandma and Grandpa's graves someday?" Each time the question sliced me open all over again. I'd look at him, the innocence in his eyes, the trust, and feel the crushing weight of my lie. I had taught him to always be honest. And yet I had built our new life on a deception. A necessary deception, a protective deception, but a deception nonetheless. Now I ask myself every day, should I keep lying to protect him, or tell him the truth, that his grandparents are alive, but they chose a birthday party over his life? What would that knowledge do to a child? Would it shatter him, or would it make him stronger? And that brings me to you, the listeners. If you were in my position, if you were a parent who had watched your own mother and father abandon your child when he needed them most, would you tell your child the truth or let him believe they're gone forever? I need an answer. Not as a storyteller, but as a mother. Denver has a strange kind of silence in the early mornings. It's not empty, just peaceful, like the world is giving you a moment to breathe before the day begins. Some mornings I sit by the kitchen window with a cup of coffee, watching the fog lift over the mountains, and I feel almost normal, almost healed, almost. It's been 2 years since Tyler's surgery, 2 years since the courtroom, 2 years since I buried my parents and brother in the graveyard of my heart. And in many ways, Denver saved us. Tyler is 11 now. He's taller, healthier, and has this wild, bright energy that fills every corner of the house. Sometimes I watch him racing his scooter down the driveway, hair flying in the wind, and I thank every star that he survived. My job has grown too. The construction company I joined in Denver has become my steady foundation. I'm trusted, respected, and for the first time in a long time, I feel valued, professionally and personally. And then there's Ethan. He came into our lives quietly, a warm smile, calm eyes, steady presence. Not flashy, not perfect, but solid. He never tried to replace Tyler's father, and he never put pressure on us. He just showed up, consistently, gently. The first night he cooked dinner for us, he burned the pasta and set off the smoke alarm. Tyler laughed until he fell off his chair. Something in my chest opened that night, something I thought had been sealed shut forever. Ethan knows everything. He knows what my family did. He knows why I cut them out. He knows why certain words, birthday, grandparents, hospital, can make me go still inside. He never pushes, but sometimes when Tyler leaves the room, he'll give me a quiet look, the kind that asks without asking. Are you ever going to tell him? I never answer, because I don't know. The restraining order prevents my parents from contacting Tyler until he turns 18. They haven't tried. Matthew hasn't either. They disappeared from our lives as completely as I wanted them to. But there is a consequence I didn't foresee. Tyler remembers them fondly. Even though they chose a party over his life, his 9-year-old brain only held on to the moments of affection. My mother making him pancakes, my father teaching him card tricks, Matthew giving him old action figures. He still misses them. And the lie I told, the lie I keep telling, is that they're dead. It started with panic in the hospital hallway when he woke up and asked, "Where are Grandma and Grandpa?" I couldn't give him the truth then, so I gave him something softer, something final, something he wouldn't question. They're gone. He cried. I held him, and the lie became part of our story. Now 2 years later, it haunts me. Because Tyler is older, smarter, more curious about the world. A few weeks ago, he asked again, this time quietly, hesitantly, "Mom, can we visit their graves?" He said it while holding a drawing of them he'd made at school, a picture of him holding both their hands, all three smiling under a big yellow sun. He said, "I want to tell them thank you for taking care of me when I was little." The words nearly broke me. My throat tightened, my heart burned. I just nodded and said, "One day, sweetheart." But the truth hovered between us like a shadow, because they're not dead. They're alive, living their lives in Chicago, probably pretending they did nothing wrong. And Tyler, my sweet, innocent son, has no idea. One evening last month, I overheard Tyler talking to Ethan while they folded laundry. Tyler said softly, "I think Mom gets sad when I talk about my grandparents. Maybe their death still hurts her." Ethan hesitated, then answered carefully, "Your mom loves you more than anything in the world, buddy. Sometimes adults carry hard memories, but she's trying her best." Tyler nodded as if this made sense. I stepped into the hallway and leaned against the wall, pressing a hand to my chest to steady myself. My child thought I was grieving my parents' deaths, when the truth is, I'm grieving the fact that they're still alive. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I lie awake thinking about the future. One day, Tyler will be old enough to ask harder questions. He'll be old enough to understand betrayal, to understand abandonment, to understand the difference between people who love you and people who only pretend to. And I wonder, will he hate me for lying, or will he thank me for protecting him? I don't know which answer terrifies me more. Ethan tells me gently, truth doesn't have to be told all at once. Sometimes it comes in pieces. But how do you tell your child that the people he once adored chose a birthday party over his life? How do you explain that some wounds aren't reversible, that some apologies never come, that sometimes protecting your child means becoming the villain in your own mind? I don't have the answer. I wish I did. So this is where my story rests. A new city, a healthier life, a home filled with laughter, real laughter, not the brittle kind my family pretended to have. A man who cares for us without conditions. A son who is safe, loved, and growing. But beneath all that light is one dark thread I haven't untangled. The lie. The one I built to shield Tyler's heart. The one that shields my own. The one I don't know how, or if, I should ever unravel. And now I'm asking you, not as a narrator, not as a character in a story, but as a mother who is terrified of choosing wrong. Should I keep the lie to protect him, or should I tell him the truth, even if it breaks him now, to save him later? If you were in my place, what would you do? Thank you for listening to my story. Your thoughts, your honesty, might help a mother make the hardest decision of her life.